Live streaming now?
I am live streaming.
So it should go directly to YouTube.
Yes.
Let's go.
Oh, we are live.
Ayo.
What is up, guys? What is going on? Holy shit, this is insane.
Oh, we're
first time live. Welcome to it.
Oh yeah, check us out.
Saturday morning caffeine and sats, where we hang out and talk about Bitcoin. This is a Bitcoin Maxi room. So if you're a shitcoiner, please hop in. Chat in the comments. We've had plenty of shitcoiners on before.
Yeah, I'll actually go ahead and keep an eye on the comments to see if we get anybody. Any questions?
Yeah, we had something recently where someone was in the Slack and they're putting just a bunch of nonsense. Like I can try to find it, but I mean, just saying things that were factually incorrect. And it's just easy. I go, okay, we're on Zoom right now. Hop on and let's chat about this. But you know the way that those go most of the time. That's why the one time it was cool that the guy hopped on. But it's like, no, I'll just listen in. I don't want to interrupt. It's like, all right, well, probably a reason for that.
All right, Sean, let's hop in. What articles did you throw for us today?
Yeah, buddy. Let me see if I can share my screen without making a complete idiot of myself here. Is this working? Like this share button's completely grayed out and I don't know what I'm doing. Did that work?
There we go.
We got you.
So this article by Dion, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but this was like a really great recap for the week. So I just thought this would be a good place for us to start. And he just kind of goes through day by day everything that was happening this past week with Bitcoin. So like Monday, and this is a good place to start. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon says that Bitcoin could go up 10x, but that he doesn't care. And on the same day, their competitor Morgan Stanley revealed that they had more than doubled their investment in Grayscale Bitcoin Trust to 58,000 shares. So you have one institution that's clearly saying, hey, this could 10x, but we don't care. We don't want to invest in it. And then you have another institution that's completely doubled down their investments. It's kind of funny that we have one institution that's completely like not wanting to go in Bitcoin, and yet their opinion is still bullish. Like they say it's going to 10x and they just don't want to be part of it. So what do you guys think about like institutional buy-in whenever we have some institutions that are just 100% bullish on it and they still just don't want to participate?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the real thing to look at, right now is obviously we talked about this last week, but the big news in this space was like Strike integrating their API with Twitter. And so you would think like, at least from like the social media side of things, like, I don't know if you want to technically call that institutional companies, but things like Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, you think they'd be like shitting their pants right now. Like, holy fuck. Like, Twitter just took let's look at how, like, what's the name of the game for all these social media companies is that they want to keep their users engaged for a maximum amount of time so that they can push the most amount of ads to their users, right? And now Twitter's taken this platform where everybody has a voice, regardless of your opinions on that, but anybody can access Twitter as long as you're not living in a state like China or maybe like Nigeria or some other places that have recently banned Twitter. But you can come on, talk to anybody. And then now with this Strike integration, now you can like not only talk to anybody, but you can send money anywhere in the world, 0 fees, instantly. So from an engagement perspective, like, this is great for Twitter. It's a very symbiotic relationship because Twitter's not taking like any pay cut from integrating this API. It's purely solely their pay is more users and more user integration. And so when you look at that model as like a whole, you have to think like Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, like everything else that's out there has got to be like, holy crap, we got to hop on. And the reason why I'm making that point is that you would think that later down the road, banks, Western Union freaking out. You're just this whole new model of user engagement that isn't driven solely by ad revenue, but also by like remittance payment revenue, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
think just going back to the, JP Morgan and the legacy banking institutions, you have to realize that a lot of like the decision makers in those organizations are not necessarily the ones that might be most on board with the technology, right? Like as an organization, maybe a lot of their analysts are looking at Bitcoin going, wow, this is really interesting. Bitcoin as an asset's interesting, but Bitcoin as a network's really interesting, right? We see that kind of being demonstrated, Alan, as you're talking about. But at the end of the day, right, like every investment has to clear a set of hurdles. And a lot of those criteria were built out a long time ago, right? It's pretty antiquated. And this new technology just doesn't really fit into the paradigm of traditional finance. And so, right, it's like whether or not these organizations are going to let their bureaucracy get in the way of the future, right? Of being part of the future. And you're going to see some that break down those barriers really early, and some are going to hold on to them and die with it. And so it's just, a mix. But I think, Alan, as you say, right, like the network's marching on, right? It's not waiting for anybody. And so it's just a question of whether or not these people want to get on board, because we're moving on without them, right? So I don't think it necessarily matters for the success of Bitcoin whether or not these people get on board or not.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I feel like they're just expected to comment on it, and maybe they roughly understand the supply and demand dynamics, but maybe they just haven't fully grasped Bitcoin just yet. And so that was what I took away from that, is I'm just not sure they fully get it yet.
Is talking with a lot of these institutions and other investment funds, what really gets them excited is the halving cycle, right? If there's sort of bringing an order to the madness that is the Bitcoin and all of its price fluctuations, I think that really appeals to them. So I think as we kind of see that play out, maybe one more time or a couple more times, like in these institutions feel like they can get a grasp on how this thing moves, maybe they're going to pile in. I don't know, but that's just my experience talking with a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like what Jack Mahler said, like open networks beat closed networks. And I think his words were, we moved on from pigeon shit to Twitter as delivering messages. And it's the same analogy with just money and like the remittance of money right now. Like we're still in this like archaic like method of settling transactions that take days and days and days to finally occur, along with like crazy fees that are just totally unnecessary. And like we're finally moving into like an era where we get to cut out the middlemen and we get to cut out government, which is huge. But overall, I mean, yeah, it is Q4 officially, and Q4. It is shock. It is shocktober.
It is Shocktober. Get ready.
Traditionally, this is the second leg of the bull run. And obviously, yesterday did not disappoint. We saw a fat spike from what we were at, like 42, 41, maybe.
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
And I think we're settling at 48 right now and some change.
Spooky
Yeah.
season never disappoints.
As soon as I went to dollar cost average, it went up. So of fucking course. I get mad whenever Bitcoin goes up now. So continuing on Monday, Jack Mahler said that he would donate all tips he receives on the platform to the Human Rights Foundation. Francis Suarez, the mayor of Miami, started advocating for Bitcoin miners to switch to nuclear power. And ending on Monday, El Salvador revealed that over 2.25 million citizens now use the Shiba Bitcoin wallet, which is no small feat considering it was launched only 3 weeks before. So, what do we think about what's going on in Miami about the possibility of nuclear power and the continued adoption where El Salvador is currently sitting?
So the nuclear power I've kindly finally started kind of reading a little bit into like the benefits of not only like mining with nuclear, but a lot of the reasons why like nuclear power in and of itself excluded from Bitcoin hasn't necessarily taken off. And I think the big reason for it is that unlike other forms of energy like hydro, coal, solar, the way energy traditionally works, right, is you have a demand, you spin up the turbines or coal burning or whatever, and you start letting things power, and then as the demand decreases, you shut things off, which is necessary to do because you don't want to expend excess energy. But as far as like nuclear goes, like you can't shut a reactor off. So in places like Canada, what they're doing with their nuclear power is they're literally giving it away for free to other provinces, or even worse, like the United States. And so I think for a large reason, for so many decades, like that's why like nuclear power hasn't really been fully embraced by the energy sector. But now with this beautiful invention of Bitcoin and miners, you don't have to do that. So you could build these nuclear reactors that are not even arguably, like far more better, A, for the environment, and B, way more energy efficient at what they do, and C, like all the reasons I just listed above, like you have these like peaks and valleys of energy consumption that usually requires like traditional energy sources to be shut off when we were at a low valley and then turned on when we're at a high. With nuclear, now it's like a viable option where you can build the infrastructure. I guess you could use the nuclear energy when needed, and then when not, you can just divert all the power to miners.
Yeah, Alan, it's interesting. My roommate works for trades like energy. And so like having this conversation with him is really interesting. And the way that he looks at it, right, is there's kind of two ways you can approach the energy grid, right? Either you can build out energy to match demand. And usually what happens, right, as you're talking about, demand's very intermittent. And so when you need to spool up a bunch of energy really quickly, that usually ends up being gas and coal, right? Because you can fire that stuff up really quickly. So that's like one approach, right? So that demand approach. Or, right, what we're talking about now is you can really overbuild your grid and then supplement demand, right? So instead of trying to match those valleys with the energy that you're producing, you just fill those valleys and pave over it like a straight line. And we've never been able to do that, right? Like, how do you instantly create energy demand out of thin air, right? That's never existed in any time in human history. Now it does, right? And it's called Bitcoin mining. And so that smooths this curve, this demand curve of energy. Not only does that actually make the grid way more reliable, but now we can build more robust systems that can be up for longer. And it makes more economic sense to actually build those projects in the first place, right? So like you're going to start seeing nuclear, geothermal, right? As we see first, volcano, Bitcoin was just mined. All these projects become viable because we've flattened the curve of demand. Right.
Yeah.
It's now,
Morgan, along with that, stranded energy is a really big one, right? These natural energy sources where it would never make sense to produce energy there because there's no human settlement there. But now it makes sense. That goes along with it.
Yeah, it'll decongest the grid too, which will make energy way cheaper, which is just good for everybody too. So that's just like a win across the board.
Like my roommate sits in the economies of buying and selling energy. He's like convinced that Bitcoin mining is the best thing to ever happen for energy. So
right, and that also shows you like how disingenuous a lot of people who claim that they really care for the environment and that they're environmental activists, how disingenuous they really are, because they're not even willing to have these conversations, right? Like that's like, Alan, I think when you get to nuclear, like I think a good framework is like, if you're not willing to at least talk about nuclear, then you probably don't really care about the environment. Your motivation's probably something else.
I think for a small amount of people it is, but let's be honest, like the general populace, they don't want to sit down and take the time to go a second layer, third layer, or fourth layer deep. They want to see a headline and then go and sit down and make dinner with their family.
Yeah.
And so like the disingenuous people, or and it's, I don't know if it's like human nature to be inherently drawn to like negative headlines, you know, but I think everybody's always a victim of it. If you see something nice, like man saves a puppy, you're going to be like, oh, that's nice. But if you see man eats 100 puppies, you're definitely going to click on the man eats 100 puppies article and like read through it, versus like the man who saves a puppy article. You're just going to see the headline and be like, yeah, whatever. So when you see something like you see a headline like Bitcoin uses as much energy as a country like Romania, for example. I'm pretty sure that was a headline that had come out like 2-3 years ago. People who don't know how like mining and how like the production of energy works and then is used throughout like the populace, they're going to go through that article and feel like they've been educated, essentially. But the beauty of Bitcoin maxis, and I don't know how, if the information gets out there for non-maxis, but I know at least like on Twitter, I love every time like some of these FUD articles come out. Morgan, I don't know if you have that IMF chart or that IMF poll pulled up or anything.
Share it real quick.
But that's like a prime example of like stirring up the hornet's nest and just like going into like one of these tweets and then just totally ratioing it to oblivion.
Yeah. So you guys can see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're just looking at this tweet, right, just like totally on your train of thought, it's got 119 likes and 1.5K replies, and their survey completely, blew back on them. So just for anybody who wondering, right, they say, okay, hashtag crypto poses new challenges to financial stability. What are you most concerned about? And then they give like some bullshit hashtag, and then there's a link here to their blog post, and it goes, consumer protections number 1 got 13% of the votes. Illicit transactions got 7% of the votes. Impact on climate got 5.5 of the votes. So all of that, right, represents 1/4, and then the other 3/4 is others comment below, and it's just Bitcoiners shitting on them, right? Preston Pish is in here. Basically, everybody I follow on Twitter commented, and it's all just like, lol, IMF get ratioed. So
Bitcoin will make the IMF obsolete. Yeah, no, fantastic stuff.
And even in a more serious manner, though, when a lot of this energy FUD comes out, there's now such a vast base of all these articles that refute things point by point. Right, at a time where Nick Carter, like 5 fucking articles in a row refuting this nonsense.
Yeah,
and so now it's like
he's been kind of quiet. I just want to say
we all have this stuff organized. So when someone makes a nonsense claim that's factually incorrect, you go, hey, if you really want to look into what you're talking about, you're incorrect. Here's 10 articles that describe in a very in-depth way exactly why. And so that's why if you're someone who is interested in this stuff and you can create content, whether it's podcast, whether you're writing, you kind of are obligated to, because it's like the network is strong. We all know that nothing's ever going to happen to Bitcoin, but like the community around it, that is important. Like that's the reason that Bitcoiners are important.
I feel like, and I don't know, you guys might have your like own separate opinions on this, but I feel like right around 2020, when the first part of the bull market really started to like ramp up, we also hit like a turning point of where like originally it was like, oh, Bitcoiners are crazy. There's a small few of them, like their points are invalid, to like now we're at a point where like any like misinformation that comes out is like completely 100% shot down every single time. It's not like the Bitcoiners that are crazy anymore. It's more of like traditional institution and like traditional media that sounds like completely just like out of loop and out of touch with reality. The Jack Mahler's interview, for example, with what was that, Power Lunch, that segment on MSNBC. Let me see if I can get that pulled up.
Just did a segment with CNN the other day that I thought was actually really great. They were asking really good questions. So it's interesting to see kind of the different networks kind of having different takes on it. But I forget what the host, her name was on CNN.
I mean, CNBC's take was, why are you in a closet? That was what they had to say in response to his comment.
Like, that's what you have to bring to this conversation, really?
Yeah.
That's so lame. That's so lame.
Oh, CNBC's getting on to me
Kenny's
for
burning
having.
up after his workout. He's got to start taking off layers.
T-shirt, dude.
Yeah, I'm wearing this to a friend's house today to go watch college football.
Nice. I remember when we got those T-shirts, you and I were like, "Wait, do we like go ask them for it, or like what happens?" Or maybe that was me and Eric.
I was in Atlantic City a couple weeks ago, and some guys at the poker table wearing this who became boys for
That's
a bit,
awesome.
and then he started talking about shitcoins, and I ditched him.
No,
No, you can't do
no,
that.
it's like the ultimate betrayal. You're like, "Wow, you're like a crypto guy," and then they're like,
we were boys
"Yeah,
for
no,
like
I'm
5
really
minutes.
into Cardano," and you're like, "No."
All right, I got this video pulled up. It's fucking.
Dude, this is about more than
gold.
just tipping people over Twitter, isn't it?
It's Bitcoin.
Kelly, I'm
man.
back. Did you miss me? Yes, Kelly, it is. They are integrating other monetary networks, but let me make this point abundantly clear. The Bitcoin monetary network is the only global monetary network that they're integrating, and it is the only global monetary network to ever exist in human history. You're talking about a monetary network that can achieve digital bearer instrument cash finality instantly and at relatively no cost anywhere in the world at any time. You combine that.
I want to
with one
skip
of the
to the part
biggest
that I was like
internet
talking
networks,
about. I'll link the video
Bitcoin,
down below.
to make tweeting
But
at someone as easy.
Essentially, like, so Jack's coming on to this show called Power Lunch on CNBC, talking about his like Strike integration, and like the female host is asking pretty good questions. She's like genuinely curious, like, what does this mean for Twitter? What does this mean for Strike? And then this old balls guy, just totally out of touch with reality.
I don't know what that questions.
Here,
you've used the phrase a couple of times.
totally out of touch with reality. Doesn't know what he's talking about.
I don't know what that means. Those sound like terms of art, which is fine. I know it's from the world you live in and not the world I live in. That's number one. But number two, where the hell are you? You look like you're in an empty warehouse or something. Where are you, man?
Everybody knows that modern day innovation is built out of a giant empty women's closet.
Yeah.
I can't tell if that's a rhetorical question or not.
That's what I was wondering. It looks like an empty woman's closet. Or not an empty woman, but an empty closet. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, you're a smart guy. Don't doubt yourself. That's exactly what it is. Now, here's what instant global cash finality means at relatively no cost. A Western Union payment can take 0 to 8 days. Remittance to small emerging third world countries can be upwards to 50%. Why? Can the dollars that are sitting in my pocket in this women's closet land in another country in less than a second at no cost? No. How can any money do that? It has to be natively digital and bearer. That is the innovation of Bitcoin. Close your eyes and picture an actual physical Bitcoin traveling across an ocean, across a globe, across a continent, a border, and landing in a physical place instantly and at no cost. Bitcoin as a digital asset is the first money in human history to enable that. And it works everywhere in the world. What the internet did to communication and enabling instant communication protocol and a singular open standard for communication for the entire planet, Bitcoin network is doing that for money. You're going to see a grand dematerialization of all of these independent monetary networks that have fixed costs, credit risk, counterparty risk, balance sheet float. I'm talking about the Visas, the MasterCards, the Western Unions, and they're all going to get dematerialized onto a one singular global monetary standard that can perform settlement instant, perform settlement at no cost, and perform settlement in a borderless fashion.
Oh, they cut out the ending. Damn. Yeah, so he has this mic drop moment, right? And the guy's literally just like, I guess he asked him like, what shoes is he wearing or something? Because it's like an empty closet. And like Mahler's just like a champ. Is just like, I got pink Crocs on, like Justin Bieber or whatever. Total power move. But like this old guy, like Mahler's is just dropping like bombs left and right, saying like, hey, like I'm trying to change the world for better. And he's like, oh, your fake internet money it's not real. This isn't going to be a big deal. And like, I just really think that attitude still resonates with a lot of these institutional companies, and the ones that are treating it in that similar fashion are going to get punched in the face really hard.
He even tweeted later, he goes, I'll be on international, taking, all things Twitter, talking all things Twitter, Strike API, Bitcoin, price action, and more. Clear eyes, full hearts, empty closets, purple Crocs. So he's owning it.
it was also like, I mean, in addition to that guy just like derailing the conversation and asking dumb questions about the closet and what he was wearing or whatever, it's like he said, he's like, I don't know what that means in regards to cash finality. It's like you're a host of a show about financial news and analysis, and you don't understand the concept of cash finality.
Well, then he said something like, what did he say after that? He's like, it seems like these are art terms.
Yeah, I was like,
what does
I
that
don't know,
mean,
man? Yeah, shouldn't you understand what this means in your position? That was crazy to me.
So continuing on with this past week. So on Tuesday, the world's largest provider of Bitcoin payments, BitPay, announced a partnership with Verifone to allow merchants to accept Bitcoin payments. ATM maker Athena also announced that Salvadorians would be able to receive their salaries through the company's ATMs. El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, also shared a video teaser of the country's plan for mining Bitcoin using geothermal energy, which is pretty cool, generated by volcanoes. And then Rich Dad, Poor Dad author warned that people should buy Bitcoin before the biggest market crash in history, referring to an expected stock market crash. So there's a lot going on in El Salvador. Obviously, everybody knows that. One thing that's kind of been on my mind, and I just kind of want to ask you guys what your thoughts are. All these companies that are having to adopt to be able to accept Bitcoin as legal tender. What happens, the first quarter, the second quarter, where we see these companies are holding the asset rather than exchanging it out for fiat, and we start seeing more and more companies becoming Bitcoin companies simply by association with El Salvador because they had to hold on to it. What's that do for adoption when you start seeing McDonald's is now a Bitcoin company, Starbucks is now a Bitcoin company?
I think the biggest change you're going to see is the abolition of quarterly earnings, because in a fiat...
I don't know if you're just quiet for me, Alan, but you're really quiet.
Here, am I better now?
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, so I think the thing you're going to see is the abolition of quarterly earnings, because quarterly earnings are very much like a fiat thing where, like, you have a company that's public, and then like the holders who own stock want to see that your company's turning a profit each quarter, right? Ideally. And on a Bitcoin standard, I don't think, let me backtrack a little bit more. So on a quarterly earning standard, quote unquote, like the decisions you're making are very short term in order to like turn a profit. And you're not really trying to think further down the road, like, hey, what's going to actually maximize my company longest term, especially for a company that's struggling, and barely making ends meet. Like they're going to be making a bunch of like short term decisions that maybe keep them afloat a little bit longer, but ultimately sinks the ship. Whereas like a Bitcoin company, they're going to be incentivized if they're going to start holding Bitcoin and it becomes like their main reserve asset. They're not going to want to just spend that Bitcoin on like frivolous office upgrades or like unnecessary like building construction. They're going to be like, okay, let's methodically think about like, hey, where do we need to allocate money? Not over the next 4 months, but over like the next 10 years. I think that's going to be a major shift.
Alan, are you basically making the point that like the cost of capital changes? So like the cost of capital, if you're using Bitcoin as a reference for your cost of capital, is way different than if you're just, so if you think of a big corporation like McDonald's, their cost of capital is what? It's essentially zero. So what that means is that the projects that it makes sense for them to invest in is any project where their internal rate of return is greater than zero. So, as long as you're doing something that's producing 1% in terms of return, you're going to come out with a positive NPV. But that's not the case if you use Bitcoin as your cost of capital, essentially the price appreciation of Bitcoin, right? So then is that kind of the point you're trying to make, or is it a little bit different than that?
No, yeah, that is exactly the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I think, and then so you see a lot of Bitcoiners, right? That shift is like when you really, so kind of when you put yourself on a stat standard and you really start thinking in terms of Bitcoin. But like any other thing that I consider doing in my personal life, I just think like if I'm thinking about making an investment elsewhere, if I'm thinking about buying something, I just say, all right, well, what is this going to actually cost me 10 years from now? Essentially, companies are going to need to do the same thing.
One thing that I was wondering about,
Opportunity cost becomes a lot higher. Sorry, Nick, go for it.
No, all good. One thing that I was wondering about, Sean, when you were, I was thinking about the same thing. Like in El Salvador, you have all these, and as Bitcoin adoption expands, like how is that going to impact like illiquid supply? Because like more companies accepting Bitcoin, you would think have a greater, circulating supply, but then when they decide I actually want to hold this on my balance sheet over longer terms, that's kind of contradictory to that. And so how's that going to impact the like supply and demand dynamics, at least in the short term?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like McDonald's specifically. So McDonald's accepts Bitcoin, blah blah blah. 90% of all McDonald's that you see are franchise owned. So I could see Bitcoin staying on the balance sheet a lot easier if it was more corporate owned. But you're going to have a lot of franchisees that need liquidity. So that's probably going to push them to exchange out for fiat more often than not. I'm kind of curious to, and maybe they'll wind up releasing this at some point, for the Bitcoin that's received, say in like El Salvador, what do the payments that have to be paid to the actual corporation of McDonald's, do they only accept payments from their franchisees in fiat? Do they allow a Bitcoin exchange between franchisee to corporate? So there'll be different things like that kind of will determine how long they actually hold these assets on their balance sheet, because you're just going to have franchisees that just can't. They're going to have to exchange out just so they can continue to run the business. Similar to miners.
I'll jump in here. McDonald's is a real estate play largely. That's what built its franchises, and Bitcoin can be viewed, in my opinion, is digital real estate. So you can really just take a franchisee, right, and they're turning profit in fiat, and the corporate structure could be set up that at some point McDonald's is saturated in physical real estate for the market that they have based on the population size, and they can leverage that physical real estate to drive profit revenue into digital real estate and grow that asset over time as well. So franchisees that can maximize their exposure in the physical world and the digital world will be able to both maximize that profit level. So in McDonald's terms, I don't know if accepting Bitcoin at the point of service in El Salvador really boosts that up, but on the corporate standpoint, if they're able to hold that on a balance sheet, it can be in a similar corporate structure organization that they did when they were expanding their franchisees. So I think it's a huge opportunity them from a corporate level, but from a franchise level, Sean, I agree, it's very difficult when the margins are tight on making the payment to justify a long-term savings account in Bitcoin or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see companies that take advantage of that corporate structure into a franchise to build Bitcoin could be at a huge advantage over the short term and long term.
I think another thing to note too is short term, that a lot of these companies aren't going to they might not accept Bitcoin as payment, but they'll use Bitcoin, the network, as a way to move dollars. I think more short term, that's more reasonable for a lot of companies. Which is something
I think because of
Kenny.
MicroStrategy, we've paid so much attention to corporations using Bitcoin as their treasury reserve asset. But I think it's also important to remember that like the amount of cash that's held on corporate balance sheets isn't all that much in the grand scheme of things. I think it's like $4 trillion out of $600 trillion pie if you include real estate. And so I think it's small. And so I think we'll be really surprised, or in hindsight, it'll seem kind of silly that we were focusing on that so much. I think the point that you just made, Alan, kind of companies plug in the Bitcoin network into their P&L is going to be a much, much bigger deal with hindsight.
Yeah, real quick, the honey badger Cody Lowe is just lurking in here. What's up, Cody?
Oh yeah, what's up? I just saw this in the Slack.
It looks like you just woke up. Fresh cup of coffee.
Hey, come on.
Hey, same. It's like day today.
What coffee you drink?
Cody deadlift 135.
Yeah, everybody knows. I'm like the Tesla robot.
Hey, at least your gym's not made out of wood, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh my gosh, I actually post on it on YouTube, like somebody who'd made their own wooden gym, and I almost sent it doing it. It was good.
Yeah.
All right, so continuing on with last week, we'll talk about everybody's favorite guy in fucking Bitcoin. On Wednesday, in an interview with Kara Swisher, Elon Musk discussed crypto regulations and suggested the U.S. government do nothing regarding regulating Bitcoin and the overall crypto market. Kathy Woods, ARK Invest, also revealed that they had purchased $42 million in Coinbase shares on Tuesday. So Elon's at it again. What do we think about Elon in the Bitcoin space and his virtue signaling for energy consumption, and then suggesting that we don't regulate it at fucking all?
I think the far more interesting interview was with the Giga Chat himself on Raw Pal, when they were going over the regulation thing and people saying like, "Hey, this should not be regulated as a security." Sorry, not Bitcoin, everything else. Everybody's saying that it should not be regulated like a security. Just go watch that interview, because that's like an intelligent take on it. Besides, shouldn't be regulated at all or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, like there's arguments against fraud, right? And so if you're defrauding people, and if you're doing it, like, there's the whole libertarian, there's people misrepresenting it, and they're like, hey, this is just like Bitcoin, or this is X, Y, and Z things. And those are like, false statements that you're doing to invest in your coin. And so that's like, to all the, like, it shouldn't be regulated or whatever. It's like, well, Bitcoin, like, insofar as you can regulate it, like, go free mine, like, it's a fair issuance through mine. It doesn't have a governing body. It's decent. But for like all this other stuff, then,
Yeah, the piece that Alan Farrington and Big Al came out with recently, and I think Guy Swan finished recording it. Only the strong survive. Have any of you seen that yet? It digs into that. It's really well written. I'm about like probably halfway through, but it's like 50-page report or whatever the fuck you call it, and it just digs deep in all these ideas. Guy Swan's a national treasure, by the way. I fucking love that guy.
Yeah, no, I hadn't seen that. But just to circle back to Elon real quick, yeah, I don't remember. I think my dad sent me an article or something about him, which I don't know why I opened it up and read it, but essentially what he was saying was just like, yeah, like I really only own Bitcoin. I own a little bit of Ethereum. I don't really own a whole lot of Doge. I only own it because my kids have it. And like essentially what he was saying was like, he'll spew all this shit, but at the end of the day, he knows like the real asset that he needs to own is Bitcoin. And he knows he has so much pull that he can manipulate the market just to accumulate more Bitcoin. Which, to get to like the regulatory side of things, like, ultimately, like Cody was saying, Bitcoin itself, super decentralized. Like, you could tax the shit out of it, but the only thing you're going to end up doing is driving wealth out of the country and into other places that have more Bitcoin friendly laws. But things like Ethereum, things like all these other coins that have had a pre-mine, have a centralized body, like what you have there, and what I've always been saying is that you have like a different version of like corporate stock, essentially. Like the whole idea that your project needs like a governance token, like that in and of itself 100% should tell you that the project's not decentralized at all. Yeah. Because the decentralization shouldn't come from the token. It should come from the miners and the node operators. And if you can't easily access the network in that sort of fashion, then what do you really have going on? Well, you just have like a tech project that you're getting funded by a token cloaked in this guise of governance.
Yeah. Do you guys, like, I haven't really thought about this too much, but like, say we do under the Bitcoin standard, all this kind of stuff, right? Is that, like, what do we do about fraud? Like, somebody's making like actual about these tokens or whatever. Like, is that something that I know there's like a libertarian argument. It's like, oh, if somebody commits fraud, they're going to get competed out of the marketplace, yada yada. You know, if somebody comes along and they're doing what people on the internet have been doing for years with like super old people, like, hey, I'm like a Nigerian prince, except like now I have a token, and they to like give their social security check to them, whatever. Is that something that we're like concerned about, or?
I've thought about this a couple
like, what's the
times.
recourse?
I mean, you're shit out of luck, essentially, right now. As of right, you can't insure Bitcoin. Like, if somebody were to steal it, you can't just be like, oh, here's some more Bitcoin for you, right? Unless, like, you have some company that springs up with, like, an insane amount of Bitcoin in their reserves, and, like, the premium to pay for that insurance is obviously going to be, like, incredibly high, that maybe something like that would come about. But in terms
I'm not
of, like, protection.
What I'm talking is, as of right now, take Cody Coin and give like 5 million coins worth to Kenny, and then another 5 million worth to some influencer, and then pay that get a bunch of retail guys to come try to buy it from me, and then I just dump all of mine and Kenny's on them, and I can like market. I can say that it's decentralized. I can say it's just like Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. And there's no recourse against that. Like, as of right now, like, there's nothing that happens to me for doing that. Right.
I don't think it's that there's nothing that happens. I think it's the IRS just doesn't have the resources or the time or energy to go after something like that.
Well, I mean, it's like, do we have a solution to that, or is like what to do about it?
What Cody's saying is like, basically recourse requires that the government and regulatory bodies have a sophisticated understanding of what the difference is between Bitcoin and other coins, and like, that's just not the case, and that's not going to be the case for a while. So like, how do we tackle that issue?
I mean, I think Gary Gensler's made it pretty clear that he has a pretty solid understanding of the difference between Bitcoin and everything else. Like, if you've looked at his comments over the past 3 months or so, or even going back to his day when he was lecturing at MIT.
Yeah.
The thing I'm not like sold on yet is like, should we be going after them, and then what's the mechanism? Right? Where it's like, for example, like, I could see that doing like, generally there's like marketing and stuff like that. If you make false claims about what your product does, sell it to somebody and they buy it with the understanding of what, right, then like, you can be liable for that. So true, then what do we do about it? I say like, oh, hey, my coin is decentralized and I can't do anything about it for me, and then of course I do exactly that thing that I just lied about. Is like, what's the liability on my end for having done that?
I mean, through like legislature and everything, like, you would have to create a regulatory body that creates strict definitions as to like, well, what does decentralization mean? You know, like, what does a governance token mean?
Yeah. That's stuff like that with like, you know, where it's like, you can't say that it's peanut butter unless it has like 70% peanuts or whatever. And it's like, you know, on some level, I'm like, hey, this is just kind of annoying, and like, people should be able to do that. But then on the other side of things, it's like, you know, like, when somebody does make a claim about one of these things, like, what happens to them? What do we do? Right.
Well, couldn't you, without having to go to like legislation and regulation, because the difficulty is not in writing their legislation, it's enforcing it. Especially at a decentralized level. I mean, if you could, from a marketplace standpoint, new coins, if you could provide added security value through some sort of collateralization on your coin. So, you know, you backed your coin by X amount of Bitcoin up to a valuation as a guarantee that if it's fraudulent, you know, that Bitcoin gets redistributed to those who issue the coin. Kind of like you put initial collateral into a company, but that seems to be the only decentralized way to prove that it's not a total rug. I mean, they could get past the valuation of the initial collateralization and then do that, but to some level, it seems like the only way to do it would be to, through a decentralized manner, guarantee it.
Yeah, like, I always think the solution for these is like to become more like more deliberate about the way that they right. Like, I think that that's generally the solution for these things, but considered in terms of like on my, it's like if somebody lies about something in the marketplace is like this is like the one solution that we have right now that like over time they'll get competed out because people won't want to deal with people who lie or whatever. Or are we going to try to make an argument for like, hey, if you defraud somebody, then there should be some sort of legal recourse against them or whatever. I don't know. I just like a mechanism besides. I don't see us proposing a mechanism that would do that. Because within Bitcoin, I don't think somebody and take their Bitcoin, then like you have their Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
like
well,
as of right now, it's like, hey, you fucked up.
Yeah, I don't see Bitcoiners trying to create that sort of regulatory body. Maybe the government will try to do it, but like ultimately, like my view on it is like you said, Cody, it's a very libertarian view where like the market's gonna eventually outcompete any like the fraudsters that are out there in the space, but also like when you're dealing, I mean, you got to like view, and it comes down to like an education standpoint, right? Like I don't think anybody in this room is going to say here that Bitcoin isn't digital gold. Like if you really think it's digital gold, then you should treat it as such and protect it with like utmost security and do like your due diligence when it comes to just storing, spending, like anything of that matter. And like someone frauds you out of it, like it kind of sucks. Like I don't know. I mean, there's part of it I feel some sympathy, especially for like maybe some of like the older generation who just so much has changed from the time they had like exited high school and college that like the financial landscape's totally different, and like they're very much used to like your Merrill Lynch and your Citigroup and like your Wells Fargo and like all these financial institutions taking care of you and having like insurance to back any sort of fraud or accident or like your house burning down or anything like that. But Bitcoin in a sense is back to more of this like raw way of storing wealth where like it really is ultimately like on the individual, unless you're going like a multi-sig route, you know. So it's something similar to like what Kenny shared, Unchained Capital, the kind of services they provide to users and their Bitcoin.
One thing I was thinking about is like I know like a lot of Bitcoiners are hoping that Bitcoin is going to push like the greater kind of populace towards like higher levels of financial literacy, and I do believe that like that's something we will do and we're trying to do. But then the broader crypto ecosystem seems to be kind of directly, I don't know, contrary to that. And so I just wondered like over the next maybe like the next generations, like the generation behind millennials and millennials, like will we collectively be more kind of financially literate than older generations or not? Like is crypto going to kind of come in, spearhead that, and just like fuck up everybody's understanding of time and value and money?
Or create another system where most people don't understand what's going on, because on Wednesday still like Umbral unveiled their first plug and play Bitcoin.
See you guys.
And that's just making it to where people don't necessarily like have to understand anything that's going, like you just plug it in and go. So are we just moving towards an ecosystem that just makes Bitcoin easier to use rather than actually focusing on financial literacy?
So I think there's a number of factors to that. One being, I think the pandemic really shed a light on the failings fiat system that we currently have. And you see this with like the rise of like these financial like meme pages and like the rise of things like Wall Street bets and everything. Like while that's not like necessarily beneficial towards your financial health, because it's a very gamified system of what like money shouldn't be, but unfortunately this is like what we've gotten to under fiat standard, and this kind of falls in line with previous falls of fiat monetary systems, is this like eventual gamified system. Losing my train of thought here. But yeah,
I can help supplement too. Like
go for it.
A good I think analogy for this is I was just like scrolling through Twitter just to like see if there was any like, you know, breaking news or whatever. And I came across a tweet and it was basically just like, you know, the real Wolf of Wall Street. And it was a picture of Nancy Pelosi, right? We've gotten so warped from, you know, where we used to be, right? As far as like an actual like functioning economy goes. And so here, just take a look at this tweet, right? Right. So it's like the real Wolf of Wall Street. And now we're like tracking Nancy Pelosi's portfolio, right? Like it's crazy. And it's true, right? Like if you actually look at like Nancy Pelosi's portfolio, it outperforms everything, you know, by a large margin. And so, you know, like the fundamentals of the market and how you make money and all this stuff, it's just all completely skewed.
But
and so
I actually think though, Morgan, I want to go back to what Nick was saying is this idea of financial literacy. If we move closer towards a Bitcoin standard, the need for financial literacy is dramatically less because you can create value once in the world and then you can store your value in the money, which would be Bitcoin. The reason that there's such a high need for financial literacy is if you want to have any hope of storing the value that you've already created in the world, you have to go so far out on the risk spectrum. At the minimum, you need to be invested in the S&P 500. But in many cases, that's probably not enough. So you need to look for early stage investments in REITs and all this crazy shit. And so even if you're someone who's creating an immense amount of value in the world, if you're a doctor, you kind of also need to be a hedge fund manager. So if we lived in a world where the money held its value and it was maintained, I think the need for financial literacy is much less. You just fucking hold Bitcoin and it kind of, once it's fully reached its potential, it kind of, the price of Bitcoin, it wouldn't even be a price of Bitcoin. So that's nonsense. I won't even go there.
Yeah. But I was, you know, what I was going to say is that, like, to your point, right, everything's so warped that we just need a critical mass of Bitcoiners to bring it into the mainstream. And once other people don't necessarily need to know, like, what is Bitcoin? Why is it important, right? They just know that this is saving technology. So, like, maybe every doctor doesn't need to become a financial, you know, hedge fund manager, right?
Yeah,
like maybe it's just
think,
a critical mass of people, and then everybody else gets onboarded.
Yeah, if you look at how much Strike has accomplished in the last 18 months, like I think the path forward is that people are using Bitcoin without even realizing that they're using Bitcoin. So you kind of Bitcoin the network, and then so like I think that's where we're going to see is the path forward, where people have no idea that you don't need to understand what centralization is, how the network functions, any of that. It's just an easier, more efficient, cheaper way to do things.
Better. Yeah, and I think that's the way it worked for the internet. Almost. Yeah. No, like for the internet too, it's like it was really, there was a smaller group relatively, you know, relative to the actual user base of the internet that really like pushed a lot of the technology forward, brought it into the mainstream, fought a lot of the regulations that were acting against it. And it was that group of people who was able to actually bring that value to the rest of the planet, right? And I think that's what Bitcoiners are, right? Like we're doing that for money.
With the main difference is that the value isn't going to accrue to that small group. The value, you can actually buy a piece of the Bitcoin network rather than buying a piece of the companies. You can buy a piece of the companies that are built on top of the Bitcoin network, but you have an option also to buy a piece of the network itself. That's the big difference, right?
Yeah,
that's
I like the idea that, like, in a way, as complicated as Bitcoin can seem to people that don't get it, in a way, it over time at least really simplifies things.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're so far down this hole of overcomplicating money. Like we literally have the US's dominant industry is service, right? And so we have our primary workforce in this industry that is like created this false idea that money needs to be this overcomplicated thing. You need to have a 401k, you need to invest in the stock market, and you need to take out loans and debt. And like, you don't need to do any of that. Like Bitcoin brings everything back to what money really is. And like, I know I'm really simplifying what money is, but in a nutshell, it's just a representation of your time, you know? And so the older you get, logically, your time should become more valuable because you're becoming more knowledgeable. So this really is like and like, here's something like I've always been like laying at bed at night, really trying to think about is like when we eventually get to this Bitcoin standard, right? And we essentially tear down all the old bad money structures that were previously built up. I try to like think in my head, like, what are these new money structures going to look like? Like, what are these new companies and financial services, what kind of financial services are going to emerge on something on a type of money that appreciates in value, right? Are we going to have this like similar financial tools going forward? Like, is there going to be a need to borrow, or is money just going to revert back to this super basic form?
Well, I mean, I think that Bitcoin is starved for good products right now. And I think that products like Strike, that are what some would consider the bare minimum for moving forward with most transactions, have created a huge uproar in the community because it's a good product. I think, good products, whether that's apps or physical products, sometimes the word makes some different uh, um, uh, connotations, but you know when you can activate some sort of service or utilize your money without having to understand everything about the technology, the business is providing value or the product is providing value, that's where you create the extra revenue, and the person doesn't have to understand that. I think now, although it's been enlightening probably for everyone on this call to learn about financial structures and energy structures and how money works and all of that stuff, that just means that Bitcoin isn't easy enough to use yet for the general public. And so once we can create products that create enough value where you don't have to learn that, because previously we've been spoiled on every instance. You turn the switch on, the light comes on. You go to the gas station, there's always gas there. You go to online, you're protected from a certain amount. You invest money, you're protected a certain way. You don't really even have to understand what the hell is going on. And the best advice on YouTube is just do what's already there for you from a financial standpoint. So I wonder what we'll see from a product standpoint, typically going to be online. What's going to be so easy to use that even someone who doesn't understand what the hell is going on can use it. And that's what's going to drive things. So like Coinbase is so easy to use. You don't have to understand what the hell is going on. Whether you like Coinbase or not, they've made it easy enough where someone who has no idea what's going on can still actively invest. That's what's a good product. So I think that's the huge opportunity layer moving forward, and building on top of Bitcoin itself, I think, is going to be where that opportunity presents itself. But it shouldn't take an army and a million YouTube videos and 10 Slack channels and 25 Discord groups and 6 conferences to be able to understand something that should be accessible to the public. That's just unrealistic to ask generally. And so for people who are interested, there's a huge value opportunity there across the board to bypass that large learning curve and provide something that can, whether that's an insurance policy, real estate policy, something privatized. I think that's where all the opportunity and growth is going to be in the next 4 years.
Justin, are you saying that the average person doesn't want to put like 10,000 hours into learning Bitcoin?
The average person is tired of me trying to force 10,000 hours of learning into their brain over dinner when they're just trying to have a drink. So
Right.
I'm tired of doing it too, although I'm getting better at it. My elevator pitch is now only like 3 hours instead of 30.
So not to get too far off track here, but I definitely, and I'm sure you guys are similar, but with my friend group, like the running joke now is, hey, Alan, how does Bitcoin fix this? Just because they know, like I've almost turned it into a joke. Like somebody will like start complaining about a problem, and like regardless of what it is, even if it's like something totally like emotional or whatever, like I'll always somehow like jokingly find a way to like tie in Bitcoin. But I think it's a good way to like really get people thinking about like, okay, maybe I should look into it. And Justin, I think you're very much right that like, no, not everybody wants to put their entire life's work into understanding Bitcoin, which is why, to tie in earlier to what Sean was saying in the article, I think what the product that Umbrel just put out, I think is fantastic for somebody that doesn't really want to learn but just wants to participate. But at the end of the day, if somebody comes to me and is like, hey, Alan, should I buy this pre-built node from Umbrel? I'm going to tell them no. I'm going to tell them no every single time.
Alan, that comes back to the idea of what you hear a lot is kind of everyone buys Bitcoin at the price they deserve, and then the asymmetry of it. Like, this is why, in my mind, this is the greatest asymmetric investment that I've ever seen by far, and that we'll ever see, is because this is the least risky it's ever been to buy Bitcoin. right? Like,
Right.
and so all the information's there. It's easily available. It takes some time to consume, but anyone can figure it out if you spend the time. And that's where the asymmetry is. Like, that's why it's such a special time to be involved with Bitcoin. So, like, these people that we're talking about, like, they will eventually buy Bitcoin just at a much higher price.
Yeah. What price targets are we considering high? You know, because like I know for a lot of people think like 100K is high, but to me, like 100K is still terribly undervalued.
Yeah, I think my friend British Hodl has like a pretty good framework for this. And if you basically take all the big asset classes and you think about the monetary premium in those asset classes, and you say that the monetary premium gets sucked out of all of those asset classes, so real estate, negative yielding bonds, etc., gold, the monetary premium gets sucked out of those asset classes and it ends up in Bitcoin, you can kind of back into a market cap, which market cap's kind of confusing, but back into a market cap and then do it on a per coin basis. And like, I think a conservative estimate over the long run, if you do it that way, is, $5 million a coin for 10. And then that gets you into that $100 trillion range, which, Plan B talks about and stuff. And so I think that's what I would think of as high, I guess, if you want to put it as that way.
I guess I should reframe as like, when is Bitcoin finally worth enough for the general populace to want to buy it? You think 40K right now, you think at the price it is right now, would like everyone would be like, I should pay attention to this. And I think it has kind of gotten to that point, especially with concerns around inflation. But even still, like, I can't wait for Moist's video to go out on YouTube of him just asking people, like random people, what they think about Bitcoin, because I think it'll shed better light on it. But from the clips that I've seen, like, people are just like, oh, it's this annoying thing boys talk about.
I think once it hits 100K, that's like some kind of psychological barrier that it's going to just.
Weren't people saying that at 10K though?
Yeah, maybe.
You know, $100, $10. Like, it's like,
no, I think Justin hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Like, I think the key is when people are using Bitcoin without even remotely realizing that they're using Bitcoin, because it's possible today with Strike. Like, if I sent you $10 using Strike right now, if I didn't know, I would have no idea that was happening over the Bitcoin network. But Strike is a Bitcoin company. So once we see Square and Cash App doing this, Venmo, etc., and then they're using the Bitcoin network as the rails, then people start to get curious. And like, we know how quickly people fall down the rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, so I think just to run through this real quick and then get to the main point. On Wednesday, despite China's moves against Bitcoin, it was revealed on Wednesday that there's still 145 Bitcoin nodes. Closing out news for Wednesday, we mentioned it earlier. Jason Stewart, mayor of Cool Valley in Missouri, revealed plans to give everyone $1,000 in Bitcoin in his town. And then this is kind of the important part that we're talking on, which is, when are people going to start paying attention to this? On Thursday, as September drew to a close, President Bukele announced that the country would give anyone using the Shivo Bitcoin wallet 20 cents per gallon discount on fuel, pushing further adoption in Central American nation. So the important thing to note here is these people are in a country that obviously has a failing currency, right? That's why they adopted Bitcoin in the way that they did. And with their own currency failing, there still has to be incentives for people to enter the network. So I think that, what price do people recognize that they should get in? I think that it's not even about the price right now. It's about at what point do people understand the need? Because the people that need it the most are struggling to actually adopt in a way that the president's having to incentivize people, similar to how, West Virginia is incentivizing people to get the fucking vaccine.
Fucking Krispy Kreme.
Mm-hmm. Gotta go with baby dog, man.
Oh no, we're getting pulled from YouTube.
Ah, shit.
No. I've always said, man, like El Salvador is interesting because we leapfrogged a ton of steps in terms of adoption here. Like we went from organic to forced down people's throats, which personally, like it's a torn feeling of like, yes, like Bitcoin's like adopted in a country, but also like this doesn't really feel like the way it should have been.
Well, Alan, I think most people don't realize that when a good is being monetized, it happens in stages, right? First collectible, then a store of value, then a medium of exchange, then a unit of account. Most people don't realize that at all. So first step is realizing that. What I've been thinking about a lot lately is realizing that this is actually going to happen on different timelines simultaneously. So basically, if you think about where El Salvador is at, like the store of value function wasn't fully achieved, but they leapfrogged and now they're on this medium of exchange. And then a lot of countries aren't even on the store of value phase, maybe not even on the collectibles phase. So we're going to have like tens to hundreds of different timelines of this monetization process. I'm trying to think through it, but I feel like that's the way it seems like it's going to be playing out.
So that's interesting that you bring that up. So do you think that just thoughts that I'm having right now is that the United States, traditionally a country that's heavy in investable assets, is going to be stuck in the store value phase for a very, very long time versus like a country like El Salvador, where only I think it's 25% of their people up until moving on this Bitcoin standard were banked. A store value phase isn't necessarily as crucial or needed in their timeline, whereas having a usable currency is more pressing.
Yeah. And right. And I also think in the US, the store of value narrative is just so palatable, especially to Wall Street and people who are used to using Wall Street to store value. Like, I think this gold 2.0 narrative is so cute. It's just it's like saying Bitcoin is gold 2.0 is saying the internet is pigeons carrying letters 2.0. It's just so underestimated, but it's easily palatable. And so, yeah, I think that's it. Right. So like countries that need a good medium of exchange will use it as that earlier. I don't know. I just started thinking about this, but there's definitely something there
No, I
with
think that's a
like
good.
the
I think that's a good
timeline
point,
being
Penny.
different at different places. Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like I just don't think the medium of exchange part of Bitcoin is really gonna, I don't know, catch on.
Well,
In
look,
the
none
United
of
States
us
for
want
like
because
a long
we're
time.
fortunate enough to be able to use other things as a medium of exchange. Like I only spend my Bitcoin if it's something cool and novel. If I'm showing someone how to set up a Lightning wallet, it's a couple sats, or if I absolutely have to. Like it just doesn't make any sense. That brings it back to the opportunity cost. Like the opportunity cost is so high that I won't move to using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange until that opportunity cost drops down by a lot. But for other people, like they really need a medium of exchange, so the trade-off is different.
Yeah, I think it
There's
just
so
like
much.
contributes to the narrative that like a lot of people have said like Bitcoin has failed as a medium of exchange, which is just
They just don't
incorrect.
understand how goods monetize. Like they
Yeah, and
haven't.
they just don't understand basically what you were just saying. Like it might not be like the unit of account for 330 million Americans, but it will be for however many 6 million
Well, yeah,
Salvadorans or
Nick.
whatever it
Look,
is.
we've
So,
leapfrogged there. A lot of us use Bitcoin as our unit of account. So
yeah,
again, it's like it's happening on all these different timelines in weird ways simultaneously. Like I certainly do. I know that most of you
Yeah.
guys probably do. Like
Yeah.
in my head, and it's taken a lot of time and effort, but in my head now I just think of things in terms of stats most of the time, or at least use it as a basis of comparison.
I'm not quite there yet.
I think
I'm
of
getting
everything
there.
in stats. Yeah. No,
My
everything.
my biggest
Literally
thing
everything.
is that from an incentive standpoint, going back to the article saying that they have to incentivize individuals to use Bitcoin, the interesting case here is like, the comparison point for me, mostly because I went to public school in America, it's all comparative instead of by unit of account, is the internet. If you told businesses the value proposition that the internet would have to their businesses in 1999, maybe a little earlier than that because most people knew by 1999, but if you were to look at it and say, okay, this can grow your individual consumer base by 10x, 100x, a million x, they would do it immediately. But the value proposition was so obvious. Now that we look back. But at the time, it was, what was the amount of work to go in and change everything that I do on a daily basis to look at that account? And so little incentives can drive people who are on the fence. So I agree with the incentive there. I think that the one thing I'm worried
Hey,
about.
Justin, can you pull your mic just a little bit closer?
Yeah. Sorry. The one thing
There
I'm
we go.
mostly worried about is if you look at like Jack at Twitter and Jack at Strike, they're not spending their time in America. They're spending their time developing areas of the world that aren't already established. So, you know, is there an advantage where existing infrastructure doesn't become too much of a burden to overcome, and where areas that existing infrastructure doesn't exist, can they leapfrog America in terms of technology very quickly without us realizing? I don't know if that opportunity has existed in the past. I would say that one of the newer countries in the world is the most dominant less than 200 years after it started existing. So on an accelerated timeline, could a country like Nigeria with new Bitcoin infrastructure be able to move technology at a faster rate than America and overtake them quickly from a specialization standpoint? That's a curious thing to me. El Salvador being another good example. I mean, I don't think they have the people power to do that, but they might be able to have an innovation power to take something to the next level or drive a big Bitcoin company centralized out of El Salvador. And if we see an asymmetric investment opportunity, is there, driving the population with that incentive to convert to Bitcoin really what's needed, or is, what does that look like moving forward? I'm curious to see what y'all think on, is individuals using Bitcoin, or is powerful people driving infrastructure to Bitcoin going to be what causes the change?
I think the most important thing to note is the beauty of Bitcoin is that, like, it doesn't matter when you get on to the network, that since it is an open network, like somebody, and Jack Mahler's kind of brought this up in his interview with Pomp, that like somebody developing infrastructure in England and coding, like it benefits El Salvador. Like Bukele doesn't need to put any resources or people into Bitcoin to make it a better network because there's already so many people building around it, that it doesn't matter when people get onboarded, that the benefits of the network per se are going to be available to everybody. Now, the benefits of having wealth necessarily, now that's going to be more spread out. And I think that's one of the things, just to circle back to like using Bitcoin as a monetary like measure of wealth or whatever. Like, it's, the more I think about it, it's like, okay, maybe people might not use Bitcoin, the currency, as money, but then like maybe everyone's using Bitcoin as payment rails for dollars. Like what point has like Bitcoin has moved on from store value to unit of account? Are we considering it unit of account if people are using it as a payment rail for everything?
No, definitely not. Right. I mean, maybe, did you mean to say medium of exchange? You said unit
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah,
account.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's what I mean.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, because Bitcoin refers to both the asset and the network, right? So if
Right,
you're referring to Bitcoin, the network, then absolutely, it's a medium of exchange. It's the way that you're
right,
sending value from point A to point B.
right. So I
So
think, I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people aren't going to realize within like the next year or so. And the way I see it is like people are going to be using it as a medium of exchange, not even knowing, to all the points that Justin had brought up, just with like the infrastructure being built up through things like Strike, things like Umbrel providing like nobody builds their own router at home, except for like somebody who's like super into it. Now, I think things might be a little bit different when we're dealing with like storing wealth. Like I think people are going to want, once they understand what they hold, are going to want to take the steps to secure their own sovereignty around their personal nodes or whatever. But I think as we build up this infrastructure and make it things more accessible to the general public, I think it encourages that discussion of education and understanding of money, or the re-education of money.
Yeah, I think the point that Justin made, like the fact that there's access to this open network and people can build and innovate on top of that, it really, like, to me, levels the playing field for people in Pakistan, people in Nigeria. And the fact that they just have pure volume of people, like Nigeria is the 5th or 7th largest country in the world. I think that's really going to like help them kind of catch up to some of the, the rest of the Western world.
A similar related point, this is why it bothers me so much when people make the point that like El Salvador is one of the most corrupt countries in the world and Bukele's a dictator. It's like, okay, sure, but it's an open network that he can't control. So like, I mean, maybe he could steal the keys, like buy a bunch of Bitcoin on El Salvador's behalf and run away with the keys, but probably not it's just like, what point are you trying to make there? It's a nonsense point. And so like, it kind of is all related where like, it's kind of related to the top that like, when someone in Asia makes the Bitcoin network better, it benefits everyone. It's the same thing where no matter who adopts it, they can't control it, right?
Yeah.
I really have trouble understanding the point that people are trying to make when they make comments like that about El Salvador, because that's going to keep happening, right?
Yeah, and like
with
there's
other
going to
countries.
be people that are going to do bad things like on a Bitcoin standard, just as there are people that do bad things on a dollar standard. But like Bitcoin should help smooth some of that out over time. It'll be more difficult. It'll just make like the collective good that much like incrementally better, a lot, hopefully more than incrementally better in the long term. So, I don't know what Bukele's intentions are, and some people have called it, into question, but like it just over the long term, more people on the network is going to be a greater net good, and there'll be a few bad actors here and there, sure. But it's going to be a lot harder for them to do what's been pretty easy in the past with fiat currencies.
So we've been having, polarizing news. We have, all this going on in El Salvador, trying to further adoption, trying to incentivize adoption. And then China comes in and they start cracking down even more than they already had been. And then on Thursday, I'm sure everybody on this call saw the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell officially stated that the U.S. government would not ban Bitcoin nor any other cryptocurrencies in the country, in contrast to China's most recent ban. Important signal for people in the U.S. and throughout the world who are still wary of investing in Bitcoin. So, what do we think about Powell's comments? I know that the initial gut reaction is Bitcoin doesn't give a shit, but
I got to jump, guys. Good talking with you.
Good talking to you.
See you, Nick. Yeah. I mean, I think Jerome Powell I think we're lucky to have, to his degree, level of understanding of Bitcoin. I think it's very much like necessary that we have someone understand the difference between like what Bitcoin is and what like other cryptocurrencies are. But like ultimately, like he knows full well, and I think a lot of other members in Congress understand that like it's a losing battle and it's a waste of time to throw money and resources into trying to regulate something that's unregulatable. It'd be similar to like, I mean, it'd be similar to like the drug war that was waged for decades.
Yeah, a little bit different though, because you're kind of messing with, I think they have much less. So with the drug war, it's like it's either like, you can smoke pot or you can, it's legal or it's not. People are going to kind of do it. But like the amount of value that people have stored in Bitcoin, like it means a lot more to people, right? So the pushback would be a lot more kind of along the lines of that. Like I think it is a bit different, but I think the way that we see things play out will be really similar. I think that we'll see things happen on a local basis. So we see what Miami's doing. We'll see certain states that become proponents of Bitcoin, and then essentially the federal government can do a lot, right? They can really make it really shitty for the on ramps and the off ramps. They can make the tax situation really shitty, but if the states kind of start pushing back against that, I think it'll work a lot like the way that we saw the cannabis legalization work, where states just go, "Fuck that, we're not abiding by this. If you're in this state, these are the rules." But I guess it's different because the federal government sets taxation rules, right? So,
Yeah, I'm not an expert on taxes, so I'm not going to step into that minefield and blow myself up. But it seems like the government, cares most about See, Kenny, government cares most about collecting whatever revenue they feel like they're owed. So until Bitcoin becomes difficult to tax, I think that it's a non-issue for them. It's actually probably a plus side because people are generating massive incomes, and collecting income tax on those, or capital gains tax, especially short term on trading, seems to be, like, hey, we're totally cool with that as long as we get paid, then there won't be any issues.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's all Uncle Sam wants, right? Is their money. But I don't know. When you hear things like Janet Yellen coming out and being like, hey, we're going to tax unrealized capital gains, it's like, all right, Uncle Sam, what the hell does that mean? Like, you want to play that game? You're going to tax my unrealized capital gains? All right, well, I'm going to have 4 unrealized capital losses, and I'm going to tell you about my boating accident that's going to happen in 3 weeks.
Right. But like, what if I just invented a coin called Lost Coin, and we just subdued the value low enough that people invested enough to offset their unrealized capital gains? I mean, there's ways you could do that, right? It would make highly speculative lost coins actually beneficial in the terms of you wouldn't get taxed. So it's a weird incentive that they would be creating with unrealized capital gains. Would be, you would want the asset to only go up when you're ready to sell. So you would suppress the market until you're ready to sell.
Well, and that just goes into my point of like just how like the drug war didn't really work out like they had intended. It's like people are always going to find loopholes, or you're going to drive wealth and innovation out of the country, or both, or even worse, both. You drive wealth and innovation out of the country, and people just get smarter and figure out other ways to work around, whether it's loopholes, illicit activity, you name it. It really just like all depends on. I mean, ultimately, like the only thing that really like should be done is like you don't want to introduce regulation for all the reasons that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, the drug war was a total disaster in terms of it just made drugs more expensive, more crime, more issues across the board. So banning something isn't the answer, but certainly
education's the right is what always needs to be taken into account for sure.
So
all right, Sean, let's wrap up this article.
Yeah, finishing up on this article, it's taken an hour and a half. On Friday, Salvadorian government started mining its first Bitcoin powered by geothermal energy, becoming the first country to mine Bitcoin, starting a green energy Bitcoin mining revolution. It's pretty awesome. Funnily enough, it came 2 days after the CEO of the Tehran Stock Exchange resigned after Bitcoin miners were found in the exchange's basement. I thought that was hilarious. The last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is there's this article, Coinbase multi-factor authentication hacked, users lose funds. So Coinbase, major exchange, disclosed today that a hacker was able to bypass the company's SMS multi-factor authentication mechanism and steal funds from 6,000 users. So if you go down, let's see here. Where did it say everything that was lost here? Approximately 68 million users. It was like birthdays, social security. Oh, yeah, there we go. Full name, email address, home address, date of birth, IP addresses, account activity, transaction history, account holdings, and balances. Now, in order to do this, they needed to know your email, they needed to know your phone number, they needed to know your password. So it's unclear, like, what happened in the first place for all 6,000 of these users to, lose that information, whether there was a phishing attempt or whatever. The point being, obviously, not your keys, not your coins, right? People go in, they use these exchanges, and obviously 6,000 customers from Coinbase lose some of their funds. So we were having a discussion earlier about, is it better to push financial literacy, or is it better to make Bitcoin easier? And I think we all know that the only way to make anything easier is to centralize it. That's the entire purpose of centralized systems, is to make things easier, more accessible. So are things like Coinbase or, say, a plug-and-play server dangerous to long-term Bitcoin literacy?
I don't think it's dangerous. I think there might be some short-term losses for sure. But just like the pop-up, you've won $1 million ads that used to come up in the early 2000s, like real quickly, like people knew not to click on like any pop-ups that occurred in that sort of manner, because they knew it was either going to put like malware, spyware, or something onto your computer, or steal your information through a phishing scam or something of the sorts of that way. Just looking at this, I know it's always bad when anybody loses information. But the big thing to note here, only 6,000 out of 68 million users. It's not all that terribly bad, but it just goes to show at the end of the day, like, okay, like if this is like your main store of wealth, you probably shouldn't be storing all of your stuff on an exchange, especially an asset like Bitcoin, where there is no form of insurance available. No one's going to get you your money back. Like you're gonna be shit out of luck if you lose it all. But I think for most people that enter it, when you get to a certain point where the money's too great, where if you lost it all, it would be so detrimental to your mental health. That's when I think it needs to really be like on you to start taking the steps like, hey, how do I better secure my funds? And maybe initially it is something like the plug and play server that Umbrel has put out. But when something happens with that, then that's going to encourage discussion or learning further down the road. Like, okay, maybe I need to build my own node and figure out how to do that. And then from like your own node, it's like, well, maybe I just need to download Bitcoin Core onto a laptop that I don't use for anything else. And like, unfortunately for some people, it's going to take a bad incidents occurring in order for them to learn. And for other people, they're going to be like naturally inclined to want to learn. But you'd have to imagine that if we move on to a Bitcoin standard, that like the education system is going to teach children and people like about these things. You would think, right?
Would you though? Because we've existed in a fiat system for how long, and how much financial literacy currently exists in the system?
Yeah, but that's because that system incentivizes the way the system's currently structured. Like it's bad to educate people on the system. Otherwise, like all these big baits wouldn't have a bunch of creditors and like loans to hand out to people.
I'm
Gotcha.
curious.
So the system's incentivized to keep everybody undereducated, and Bitcoin is incentivized to keep everybody educated.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the biggest thing is right now, people who are in Bitcoin are willing to take risks to fail. So a lot of products potentially gain trust that wouldn't have gained trust by the large public moving forward. I think Coinbase is not an exception to that rule when it originally started, but now I would venture to guess it's probably the main on-ramp for individuals who are starting to invest in crypto, especially in the United States. I don't know if guilty is the right word, but I'm still a Coinbase user, only because of its ease.
I won't shame you, Justin.
But, hacking, I remember, phishing emails, IT guys will go crazy because they're so easy to catch people on. And it's never from the outside in that causes the issue. It's always from the inside out. So someone internally or, is willing to give away their information. I wouldn't fault Coinbase for having someone give away their information and allowing access to their account. I'd be curious to see if the information was leaked from individuals giving their account information out or someone internally on Coinbase. I don't know if maybe I'm just interpreting the article incorrectly, but
I think the important thing to note is they say that for the hackers to actually accomplish this, they needed to know your email, your password, your phone number, and have access to your email. So it's like, I mean, there's a reason there was only 6,000 accounts that were hacked. Like, it's not really a hack. Like, you basically like wrote down all the information and handed it to somebody. It's not really a hack.
Right.
So there was very clearly fault on the users here. So it's not necessarily all on Coinbase. Like, Coinbase is going to take the heat because obviously it's a centralized database. But realistically, if that much of your information is getting out, like, you personally made a mistake.
Yeah, so I think we found ways to get around that if you have a serious amount of capital invested in this to not be on a centralized exchange. But I think that as the value proposition of a centralized exchange grows, there'll be more and more that appear that people are willing to trust just based on returns like there has been. And then as they become bigger, they reduce those returns. It'll just continue to happen down the line until there's something that offers ultimate security, which will be fully decentralized. So there's a bunch of options. It just doesn't seem like Coinbase is really at fault here. I mean, I have all that information usually and click forget password and can get in within 5 seconds. So if I can do that, someone who's trying to steal money can obviously do that in almost no time.
All right, well,
Moral of the story: don't not your keys, not your coins, right?
Always.
Yeah, that's it for the articles, Alan. If you'd like to close us out, or if you have any closing thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's all about we got. We're right at the hour and 30 mark. Forgive me if things were a little clunky this go around. This is our first live stream, and I'm still testing out a new platform called Riverside as well. So we're working out some kinks. I know we've got a new format going on for the show. Moist is kind of taking a comedic Steven Crowder type approach to his interviews. He's got a video dropping on Monday, I believe. But it's pretty much him going around and asking normie people just what they think Bitcoin is. I know Sean's working on some ideas for what he's going to do for some shorter segments. I'm going to start doing tech reviews on projects. I did just purchase that plug and play Umbrel node just to give my 2 thoughts and cents on the issue, but I'll be purchasing all kinds of things from Trezors, cold cards, ledger wallets. We'll be building my own node using various Raspberry Pis and such. So keep an eye out for that. But as always, Justin, I appreciate you coming on and sticking through the hour and 30 minutes here. And if anybody else that's either in the live stream or watches this later down the road, if you're in Palm's Crypto course and in the Slack channel, that is the best way to join. I always put the Riverside link in there. Super easy. You just click on it, hop in. You do need to use the Chrome browser. Unfortunately, I know for a lot of us Bitcoiners, we've been using DuckDuckGo, but Riverside requires the Chrome browser. So apologies for that. If you're on Twitter, go ahead and DM me on there. I'm happy to shoot you the link over if you want to hop into one of our Saturday morning caffeine and sessions. So yeah, if you made it this far, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. We do these every Saturdays. They get uploaded on Sundays. Go follow us on Twitter at COB Podcast. You can find myself at Alan Hoddle. And I'll let Sean introduce himself and give all his handles out and everything.
Yep. You can follow me at Twitter at fall_of_fiat.
Awesome. And Justin, can we find you on Twitter?
You can. I think I only have like 9 followers, so maybe I'm not worth listening to. But I just did start last month, so thanks for having me on, guys. My Twitter's at JNellyman. It's just a picture of me with a bird. So follow if you will. If you don't,
I'll link
then I'll thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to joining every once in a while.
Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Thanks for coming on. Deuce, guys. Have a good weekend.